Well, I'm glad to be back with you one more time. I have appreciated the generosity of your hearts, minds, and ears. I've been long-winded the last couple of evenings, and I haven't paid close attention to the clock, but I don't know exactly how long I preached, but I know it was a significant period of time. Stanley encouraged me a couple of times beforehand not to worry about the time, and I've been grateful through the years that brethren have been very kind about that. And I'm typically my own worst critic about that. Well, maybe not, but folks have been gracious. You've been very gracious about that. And this morning we have a long period during this class, and so we'll ease through several things. And then during our worship period, I'm going to talk about the early life of Jesus. I'm going to turn the schedule around and talk about training children this hour, and then the early life of Jesus during the worship period, which is a shorter amount of information. My wife mentioned to me I might ought to express something about the flea market. I don't go to the flea market to sell anything, and so some might not understand that. You usually go to buy and sell. But to set up a booth about 3.5 years ago, and spend every Saturday out there for the day, trying to reach out to people with the gospel. And so I have just a little correspondence course and a daily Bible message card. But those are really just avenues by which to sort of start conversations and to try to break down some of the cold contact concept that's there to interact with people. And from this, we've had several studies. The first year and a half or 2 years, it was a little slower going. We had a real good conversion of a Hispanic family, and all that. Her English was not very good, so it's been a challenge in the environment with an English-speaking group. But they're good people. They have 3 girls. We've had a number of baptisms this last year. Have several good studies going right now. And so that's what that's all about. And there's nothing fancy, it's just basic, but it's just people interacting with people. And that's what it's really about. The greatest evangelistic program that has ever existed, you can read about in the Bible. And it was brothers and sisters in Christ reaching out to a lost and a dying world. And so there are different ways we can go about that. We have the same gospel, we just have to use the opportunities that we have. You read through the book of Acts, Paul didn't go only to the synagogues, he went to other places. And it just depended where the opportunity was at. And so this, in our case, is just an opportunity, a place where hundreds and hundreds of people come through, and most people aren't interested. I've been impressed with a couple of things. Occasionally you'll get knotheads, you get people that are just trying to be honoring. But generally, folks have been good-spirited. There are many folks that come through, and even though they're part of the denominational world, probably, and they don't talk about it a lot, just so happy that you're out here doing this. Somebody needs to be doing this. And so there's nothing fancy about it. The other thing that happens sometimes as we are involved with evangelism is we start as folks to try to do something, and we do it for 6 months or a year and a half, and say, well, it's not turning the world upside down, so we just need to quit this. And oftentimes what happens is during that time you sort of establish yourself. People get to know you. And sometimes that's a problem we need to continue to do. I'm not saying you just get in a rut and close your eyes. But we just have to keep going and keep working at it. And we need to make some alterations sometimes just to reach community. Well, that flea market just happens to be a place where there's lots of people. So that's all that's about. So anyway, just for clarity. But I enjoy it. The folks that we interact with, are certainly encouraging. Have a number of studies. Oftentimes people don't obey the gospel, even though you have many studies. You may have one study, and that's not exactly what they're looking for. They may visit services. This is not exactly what we're after. It doesn't change the gospel. It doesn't change our responsibility. We just need to humbly and kindly reach out to a lost and dying world. Not in arrogance or self-righteousness, but just we have had and have a need, and that's our Lord and His forgiveness. And we know the whole world needs that. And so that's all that's about. Just very simple. I'm just, as you've seen, I'm just a simple guy. I'm not very deep. There's nothing about me, except I love the Lord and I want to go to heaven. And I'm just struggling along, doing the best I can, trying to serve Him. He's patient with me. My brethren have been patient with me, and I'm so thankful for that. I'm a person, and I love people. And I love being loved back just like you do. And thank you for your encouragement since I've been here. Y'all have just been so wonderful and kind. And I was looking forward to talking about this home and family. This is something that I feel deeply about. I just deeply about it. And I think it's such a critical issue for our time because families are under attack. But the other thing I was really looking forward to is getting to come and know you all, my brothers and sisters. And it is a joy. And thank you for everything that you've done. With Deborah and myself so comfortable here. Appreciate Stan looking after us last night. He put us up. He made breakfast. And I told him I wouldn't let the cat out of the bag because Carla might expect him to start making breakfast. But I slipped up on him. But he has been so kind. I haven't got to spend time with Stan. We were together in Nashville some weeks back, and he presented a lesson on managing our time. And did a really good job of that. It made me appreciate him that much more. It's the first time I got to hear him speak. But he just talked to several folks there. And I think there's a younger man there that made some comments later. I think that lesson probably was very helpful to him. And so I appreciate that. We have a need to know. And so our job as teachers and preachers is to make known the will of God. And like Acts 2 said, and then exhorting people, just encouraging people. Look, this is what we need, friend. And so this morning, as we talk about raising children, that's the sort of the same thing. Just there's some things that we'll talk about this morning, and hopefully they'll be helpful to us. There are a lot of things that we can consider as we go through this series of studies. As we're talking about parenting skills, there's a passage that many of us are familiar with. Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 6. Train up a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he'll not depart from it. This is not a mark against my brother-in-law, Deborah's brother, Mark. And when I was dating Deborah, we taught a class one day. I was a young Christian. And this passage came up, and Mark said that, that's an absolute truth. I mean, you train them up, and they will. And I said, well, I think there's some other factors in there we talk about. Of course, you don't believe that, anymore. This is a rule of thumb. And all I would have to suggest in that is to look at places like Ezekiel chapter 18. There are other factors involved. The book of Proverbs is very much a cause and effect kind of a book. You do this, and this will happen. And so that's a sort of a nuts and bolts, straightforward wisdom and advice, great exhortations. But then if you go to the book of Ecclesiastes, it says, but there's some other factors. There's injustice in the world. Ezekiel 18, there's free will in the world. Choose you this day whom you will serve. And so free will enters into this. And as we talk about training up your child, I want to express that free will with every child is a reality. If this was a concrete verse that says, you train a child right and they will be faithful, then you've taken the free will out of that. The second problem with that is there's only been one perfect father. The father of Israel, the father of God's children. He fathered perfectly, but his children chose what they would do. And so I'm trying to put a disclaimer on here. I understand that. And that we have this powerful capacity to be able to choose. And frankly, we will do what we want to do. We'll do what's in our heart. We will make those choices. Now, there are factors and influences that play into that. But I believe very strongly this passage and the critical nature of the training of our children. And of course, the devil would like to say, well, just let us raise them. Let the schools and let the internet at this day and age, let these other factors, and then they go up, they can choose. Well, that's not what they're doing. They're trying to train up our children. But that's not what God wants, and that's not what we should want as parents. Train up a child in the way, there's a way to go, in the way he should go. And even when he is old, he will not depart from it. We poured a little concrete pad back in Illinois a few years ago. And our grandkids took their hands and put it in there and scribbled their name under that concrete. Once that set up and stayed, it's going to hang around. And for parents like myself, We may be struggling with a child that's chosen maybe to go away other than we understand they want to go. They make some choices. You just remember, you've planted a lot of seed. And that seed sits there a long time. I've got watermelons, the plants that are popping up. The seeds are from 2007. I've had a little container, I've had them in a drawer so they'd be protected from the sun and all. But most of those are coming up. That's been 11 years. When seed is actually out here in the ground, especially like wheat seed, it may stay there for many years. It may stay there for 10 years sometimes, a farmer told me. And so you just remember the seed that you have planted, it's back there. And there may come a time and a place, it may be a change of circumstances, it may be just a reflection of who I am, what life is about. It may be someday they wake up in the morning and look in the mirror and say, listen. And so I say that to give us hope. And as long as there's life, there's hope. And dealing with people, not just our children, we have to understand, I have to believe that people can change. Now, often they won't. But if I have decided people won't change, then I'm not going to do much to try to help them. The devil's happy with that. Now, I've got to use some wisdom. I can't push it down their throat. I can't force them. But I can encourage, set example, show them God's love and His Word, show them love in living out in our lives. And with our children, certainly, we want to press forward. We talk about parenting skills. The idea of skill is something that we learn. It is a skill that we become capable of. You'll see a skilled craftsman oftentimes make something very difficult look very easy. And that's a reflection of his or her skill. And so as we think about parenting, there are certain things for us to learn. There are certain things for us to have to sort out and figure out. And as you are learning a skill, if you're a skilled person, one of the things that happens along the way is you make some mistakes. But you just don't want them to be critical mistakes. And so we do the best we can. When Deborah and I started out raising our own children, I didn't grow up in an environment that I knew all about that. So I struggled trying to sort it out. And the congregation that we moved to when I was first preaching, when our children were young, the young people there had a lot of problems. Matter of fact, within the first couple of years, I was seriously thinking about maybe moving somewhere else. And we thought about it, Deborah and I talked about it, and we said, well, we're going to have problems wherever we go. We just need to put down our roots, and we need to be what we are supposed to be. I talked to some other young families that were concerned as well, and we tried to do that. But I didn't know exactly what to do. I mean, I learned some good things from my folks, and probably some things that didn't work out so well. And so I was looking everywhere, trying to find information. I was talking to people. I was trying to read some things. I sure at that place in my life wish God would put another book or two in His Bible. Now here's how to raise kids. But the reality is He put everything in the Bible. He put everything in His book that we need. We just have to take it at face value, use the greatest wisdom that we can. We're going to be driven by the right kind of motives, and that will be helpful. And we can learn skills, and certainly, as you are aware, that oftentimes a craftsman will study with another craftsman to learn that particular trade. As we think about parenting, you look around and you find people that have successfully raised their children. And number one, you'll find out they have some struggles somewhere along the way. They made some mistakes themselves. But you can learn a lot from them. Now, you don't take their word over God's word, obviously. But that kind of a godly person is going to have respect for the will of God. And you're going to have to make some decisions along the way. In the book of Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4, a passage that we are familiar with. Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4. Now, again, brother, what time is this class again? A quarter till. Okay. Just so I thought, man, I'm good. Lots of times. The time's already getting away. Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4. And fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord. Here's the idea of bringing up. They're not like cattle that you just turn out into a pasture and let them feed and grow up. This idea of bringing them up carries with it the idea of training and cultivating. Some may have gone to Asheville to the Vanderbilt house over there. And out in those gardens, best I remember from many years ago when I was there, there's all kinds of nice growth out there that's been often trained. If you think about grapevines, often you train those, you prune them, you're trying to train them in a certain way. And so as we think about Ephesians 6:4 at the beginning, we're talking about a training process. And in Matthew chapter 7 and verse 11, we all have our shortcomings as parents. This is the passage that talks about ask and seek and knock. And as we do that, you remember, he tells us here in verse 11, if you then being evil know how to give good gifts to your children. Now by evil, he's not talking about mean fathers that don't care about their children. He's talking about their earthly fathers were human and had their shortcomings. But yet, a father, if his son is hungry and he asks for a loaf of bread, he's not going to give him a stone. You're not going to give him a serpent or a scorpion or something like that. His earthly father tries to do good for him. And so when he talks about having earthly fathers, they are evil, he's just saying, yeah, we have our shortcomings. But how much a greater opportunity we have is we ask our perfect heavenly Father. And so we can trust God. He is the perfect Father. But here, as we think about this from the aspect of our subject this morning, the reality is, we try to do the very best we can, and we may do a really good job of it, but we still have our shortcomings. And that's one of the things that we have to be honest with our children. When we make a mistake as a parent, we have to have enough humility to say, son, I'm sorry, I was impatient and I messed up, I barked at you. I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry, I was wrong about it. And they can respect that. If I'll be honest and humble with them, that doesn't mean I want to keep barking at them and saying, I'm sorry about that. No, but I need to grow. But we have our shortcomings. And so understand anything that I say this morning, it is intended from that perspective. I have no arrogance or self-righteousness or anything that I'm going to say. But we have tried hard, and we're thankful for what God has provided. Each child is different and complex in their own way. Every child is different. We had 4. Deborah ran a daycare in our home for lots of years. We have now grandchildren, and every one of those kids are different. Yet on the other side, there's some certain nuts and bolt things that are true, and some things that you work with. But you're going to have to use wisdom, and you may treat this son different than this son because of the needs that they're. You always want to be fair and just. But you have to use your head. You have to look at them and try to figure out, how can I help this child? I may say, no, you can't do that. I may tell the elder, yeah, you can do that, because it's going to help them and hurt them. And so we just have to do the best that we can with that and try to help them understand that we're trying to be fair. And I cannot overemphasize the importance of those early years. I do not know what they say anymore, but the Catholic Church used to say, if you will give us your child for the first 6 years of his life, or her life, they will be Catholic the rest of their life. Now that's an overstatement. But it is a reflection of the reality that those first years of development are critically important. Now, I don't have to have that quote to demonstrate that. I can look at my Bible, and it talks about training children and little ones, and you look at the book of Proverbs. It's a great counseling book on family. It has so much to say. But these early years are so important. As I used that illustration about concrete a while ago. You try to go out and put those names and handprints in, you're going to have to get out an etcher to do that once the concrete is set up. It's going to be a big job. But why is still soft? You can form that in such a way that it'll have a lasting impression. So I cannot overemphasize the importance of this. Some folks say, well, my kids aren't that interested. They get to be teenagers, you get to be more adult, then I'll start taking interest in them. That's way, it just doesn't work that way. You build that relationship with them from the time they're small. And then through those years, you can have a connection there that will be critically important. And this is something that was helpful to me. I was struggling those early years I told you about raising our children, and I was worried about getting down the road because there were so many problems that people were having. And I was taking an old preacher back to the airport, and he listened to me whining for a little bit and my concerns. And he says, Gale, your problem is you just need to listen to the Lord. Of course, that's what I thought I was doing. He said, you just need to take it a day at a time, is what he said. And this was the passage that I would connect with that one he was referring to. And we need to live today as we need to live. And I believe this is critically so as we think about raising our children. But I think it's critically so as the Lord talks about the Sermon on the Mount about life. Therefore, do not be anxious for tomorrow will care for itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. And the point that this fellow made, he says, listen, you just live and do what you're supposed to do today. You and your wife, you do those things for those children the best you can today. And if the Lord gives you tomorrow, you live tomorrow in a way that honors God and instructs them in God's Word. And you be the example. You live the life tomorrow. And then the next day, if the Lord gives you that, you live that day. And then whatever bridges come down the road, you'll have done everything you can to be prepared to cross them. That was some of the best advice anyone ever gave me. I had to learn it. I get worried about all this stuff down here, and certainly I need to be mindful and plan certain things. It's not excluding that. But I just need to get busy today and be what I need to be. And I can make that, if I'm not going to do it, I can make that decision today. Okay, today we start, and we're going to do it today. If He gives me tomorrow, we'll do that. And so that was a great piece of advice. But children are a blessing from the Lord. They truly are. And again, we live in a society where some folks feel like that, children are a burden, and we're taxed by them. And we could go a lot of directions with this. But selfishness, self-will, there has been a demographic video clip that's been out for many years. And it's about how many children families have. And it's actually saying that Islam are making great inroads into the world. And that in many of the European countries, families are only having like 1.1, 1.3, 1.4 offspring. That's the statistics. And the paradigm for a society to be able to sustain itself is 2.11. Anything under that, a nation will not be able to sustain itself economically, is what they're talking about. In the United States, at that point, it was 2.11. We were at the dividing line, and much of that was with the influx from foreigners coming into our country. But with some 60 million abortions taking place, and with families using means to keep from having children. Some families choose not to have it, and that's so, that's their choice. But in the midst of all of this, there's an opportunity for us to have an influence in the world. And from this, certainly, our lives can be impacted in a most wonderful way. I had a friend that was an older preacher than I was, and he wasn't too old at the time, but he was compared to me. But he says, so when you get to be my age, you'll look back at life and you'll see there are going to be two important things. And that's going to be your physical family, and it's going to be your spiritual family. And there's a lot of truth to be said about that. And as you look at things that are really valued, there's a lot of things when you get at a later place in life that they're just not so important anymore. Sometimes we put our ladder on the wrong wall. When we get to the top, we find out what we have done. Well, the Word of God helps us to try to overcome that. These two passages in the 127th and 28th Psalm are great passages. They're called Psalms of Prosperity. It says in chapter 127, Psalm 127, unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman keeps awake in vain. It is vain for you to rise up early, to retire late, to eat bread of painful labors, for He gives to His beloved even in his sleep. Now, that's an interesting statement, isn't it? One of the ways I suggest that happens as we plant the will of God in our hearts and our lives and our minds. It's out there growing. God knows how to provide. Behold, children are a gift of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. How blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They shall not be ashamed when they speak with their enemies in the gate. 128th Psalm. How blessed is everyone who fears the Lord, who walks in His ways. When you shall eat of the fruit of your hands, You will be happy, and it will be well with you. Your wife shall be like a fruitful vine within your house. Your children like olive plants around your table. Behold, for thus shall the man be blessed who fears the Lord. And then he talks about Zion, and may Zion prosper there. Indeed, you may see your children's children. Peace be upon Israel. As you look at those two chapters, there are many things that we can say, but you notice here that they were called Psalms of Prosperity for a reason. You remember when Job was attacked? That which he had, he was the greatest of them in the East. He lost his physical assets, but he lost his children. They understood that that was one of the greatest blessings that they could have. And certainly it's the picture the Scriptures teach. And for folks that are trying to serve God and seek things that are higher, we understand greatly the power. Let me just throw this disclaimer. When we open our hearts to love for those children, we open ourselves up to pain sometimes too. You look at what our Father in heaven has done by loving us. I'm afraid we almost glossed over the pain that God has observed. You go to Genesis chapter 6, it grieved him of the wickedness of man. He grieved for his children. But I'm telling you, it is worth it. Love is worth it. And there is hope. Even through these griefs, the Lord is able to take things and make something out of them if we're willing. He talks about around the table here as he describes this. You know, that's something when I grew up, my father did electrical work for a company, and he would get off at a certain time, and we had supper time. And we would sit around the table, and we would learn a lot of things. My father remembers this to this day. We were around the table one night, and my sister reached over to do something. She knocked over her tea. And my father just chewed on her real good. So you need to be not so klutzy and be careful what you're doing. A few minutes later, I reached over and I knocked my tea over, and he really chewed on me for a while, and it wasn't 2 minutes later, he reached over to get the gravy and he knocked his tea over. And my sister and I were sitting over here trying to not laugh, and all of a sudden he just burst out laughing, and so did we. But he tells me, he said, I remember this occasion to this day. And I got some humble pie. But so often, I mean, that's just a little incident. But we talk about life and we interact. And if you can take that time, I know that we live in a busy time, but if you can take that time, and you'd be better off to have cheese and crackers and just have something really simple and get to spend the time together interacting. We would be a lot greater blessed than having all this big stuff and to be so busy that we miss each other. And I hope you get the point, the simplicity of that. It's about people. It's about each other. And again, our children learn how to help. Blessed man has his quiver full. He has strength both near and far. There's an old adage, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, the acorn doesn't fall far from the tree. Our children are going to be a shadow or reflection oftentimes of us. Again, as we said at the beginning, they have free will. They will choose. And there are other influences in this world. And so I want to be clear about that. But as we think about training up a child, this is true. A few points we have here. Always follow the rule of love. I asked one of my daughter-in-laws back about a month or so ago, told her I was going to be teaching on home and family at a gospel meeting and going to be talking this summer. What are some of the things that you see as important? And she mentioned a couple of things that I've talked about for a long time. She says one of the first things is that is this statement: one of the best gifts that I can give my children is to love their mother. They need that. Fellas and wives, as parents loving each other is one of the greatest gifts you can give your children. And what we talked about the last couple of days lays all that foundation, doesn't it? And that's the point of the lessons, to help us. None of these lessons are designed to browbeat us or to throw us a barbell for already struggling. They're intended to help give us information, to help exhort us, encourage us in the way to go. But I believe that this is true, that we need to love each other, and I'll have back up here a place for intimacy, for that touching and so forth that we talked about. I have a chart here again, as I mentioned last night. Our children need a place of security, physically, sexually, and mentally. We live in a world that's not safe in any of those areas. And there are threats. And so our home needs to be a refuge, if you would, for them, and a place for training. And as we think about our girls growing up, they need to be hugged. They need to see a genuine demonstration of their real importance and worth. As a father, putting my arm around my daughter and giving her a squeeze and let her know how special she is, it means the world to her. And oftentimes it may help her as she looks for a husband to see how she was treated by her father. That warmth she wants, and somebody's going to have that level of security, but they need that and understand how precious they are and how much they are worth. And our boys need, among other things as well, respect and a building of self-worth. We'll have some other things to say about all this, but those are some fundamental needs. Always, as we talk about following the rule of love, treat others the way you want them to treat you. And as a parent, I want you to stop and think about that. Okay, here I am as a parent, and here's my children, my son or my daughter. Well, what happens if we trade places, and I get over here, and I'm the child, and here's my father? How would I want my father to deal with me? Now, I realize as a child I don't understand about that, but from a parent, you can reflect upon that. Here's the mutual respect of humanity, that we treat others like we were going to be treated. Now, as a child, they may not know what they need, and as a parent, hopefully we're trying to help them understand. That's why we are training them. Okay, but we learn this along the way too. But as we look at this, that we're to follow this rule of love. In Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 3, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may be well with you, and that you may live long on the earth. And so children, you are to obey your parents, and you are to honor your father and mother. Of course, that was in the Ten Commandments, wasn't it? It's a fundamental concept of the Scriptures. But let me notice something here. What happens when you see a child rolling their eyes? Oh, that's stupid. Oh, my dad is so dumb. Nobody's ever done that if you're right. Is that honoring? As a parent, is that showing the spirit of honor and respect? You may not understand. And as we've already said, they will not do it perfectly. But let me just tell you, there's nobody in this world that loves you more as a young person than your parents do. I was at a lecture one time, and a fellow was talking about a story of fellows that took an airplane up into Alaska to go fishing. And a father and his son was there, and the son fell off the pontoon plane as they were getting off of it, got out into the currents, and was being swept away. There was nothing there that could be done. The currents were powerful, the water was terribly cold. And the father jumped in after him. He said, "Don't do that. You can't save him." I said, "I know, but I cannot allow him to perish alone." And then the gentleman asked, in this setting, it was not a worship, simply like this. He said, "Stand up, parents, if you would lay down your life for your children, for your child." And every parent and these several hundred people that were there stood. And we know that as parents. But as we're trying to train our children, sometimes they get frustrated because they don't understand what's going on, and we do it imperfectly. But the reality is, as parents, we love our children more than we love our lives, our own hearts. We would lay down our life for you in a heartbeat. And so young people, I want you to understand that. And the next time mom and dad are chewing on you or fussing at you for something, they may be tired and may be impatient, and they may drop the ball at that time. But the reality is, most of the time what they're trying to do is they're trying to help you to grow up so that you can stand on your own 2 feet. That you'll love God, that you'll have some discipline about you, and that you'll be able to be a fine man or woman, serving God, and ultimately have heaven as your home. And so respect them, show them the honor that's due them. Obey them. We'll talk about the early life of Jesus later, but Jesus himself was subject to his parents in Luke the 7th chapter. Now, if anybody had an opportunity, if anybody knew more than their parents. It would have been Jesus. But the Son of God himself did what was right, and he honored his father and his mother, and he submitted himself to them. Always follow this rule of love. They need to know that people are more important than things. I've got my charts here, so let me catch up with myself. I make thumbnails. I don't have any, these are my notes, same thing, but I have a couple of papers in here. There's a parable of the lawn that I ran across in the bulletin 35 years ago, and give or take a few years. But it left an impact upon me. It was helpful to me. I grew up, my father liked things fairly orderly. We took care of things. I still believe in that. But this helped me out. Let me read this. The parable of the lawn. When Mike was 3, he wanted a sandbox. His father said, "There goes the yard. We'll have kids over here day and night. They'll throw sand into the flower beds. The cats will make a mess in it, and it'll kill the grass for sure." When Mike was 5, he wanted a jungle gym set with swings that would take his breath away and bars to take him to the summit. And his father said, "Oh, I've seen those things in backyards, and do you know what they look like? Mud holes in a pasture. Kids digging their gym shoes into the ground. It's going to kill the grass." And Mike's mother said, "You'll come back." Between breaths, his dad was blowing up the plastic swimming pool he warned, "Do you know what they're going to do to this place? They're going to condemn it and use it as a missile site. I hope you know what you're doing. They'll trap water everywhere, and they'll have a million water fights. You won't be able to take out the garbage without stepping up to your knees in mud." And we took the swimming pool down. We'll have the biggest brown hole on the block. And his wife said, "It'll come back." When Mike was 12, he volunteered his yard for a camp out. As they hoisted the tents and drove in the spikes, his father stood at the window and observed. "Why don't I just put the seed in a cereal bowl for the birds to eat and save myself the trouble of spreading it around? You know for a fact that those tents and all those big feet are going to trample down every single blade of grass, don't you?" "Don't bother to answer," he said. I know, it'll come back." A basketball hoop on the side of the garage attracted more crowds than the Winter Olympics. And the small patch of lawn that started out with a barren spot the size of a garbage can soon grew to encompass the entire side yard. Just when it looked like the new seed might take root, the winter came with the sled runners beat into the ridges, and Mike's father shook his head and said, "I never asked for much in this life, only a patch of grass." And his wife smiled and said, "It will come back." The lawn this year was beautiful. It was green and alive and rolled out like a sponge carpet all along the drive where the gym shoes had trod, along the garage where bicycles used to fall, around the flower beds where little boys used to dig with iced teaspoons. But Mike's father never saw it. He anxiously looked beyond the yard and asked with a catch in his voice, "He will come back." I read that as a young man, and it really reflected this concept that people are much more important than things. That's an important lesson. Now, I'm going to put a disclaimer in that, as some years have passed. There are sometimes folks say, "Well, things don't matter, and so we're just going to let them tear them up, and I'm not having self-control," and they come into somebody else's house, and it's like, "How much can I tear up? I'm going to bounce off the couch, hang from the chandelier." We need to teach them to respect other people's stuff, and I think we need to teach them to a certain amount of appropriate respect in our home. But people are more important than things. One day, some friends of ours were over having lunch back in Illinois years ago, and the boys came in, and I had one of those good moments in my parenting career where boys come in and said, "Dad, the tile spade, we broke the handle out of it." I said, "Well, were you doing what you should?" "No, so we were digging and pulling back on it, and it broke." I said, "All right, we'll go get a new handle." And went off, and the guy sitting across from me, a good friend of mine, he said, "Is that all there is to that?" I said, "Yeah, they were doing anything wrong. I mean, I broke handles out of shovels because I tried on them too hard." And so sometimes we just need to understand that. When stuff happens, there's no no ill intent there. There's no meanness. And you say, well, next time, you might try chopping, you might give them some instruction. Here's how you get that out instead of getting on top of them, jumping up and down, trying to get that rock out of the ground. And so we give them a little bit of instruction. But it's an opportunity for them to understand. Again, people are more important than things. As we read it a moment ago in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4, fathers are not to provoke their children to anger. Well, there are a number of ways that can happen. I'm going to go through these quick, but I think that they're important. And again, these charts will be on your website, so you're welcome to go back and look at them. I hope you'll go back and look at them, think about them, reflect upon them, and may they help you wherever that help is needed. We can provoke them to anger by harsh and critical spirit instead of concern and love. And depending on maybe the situation we've grown up in, our own frustration, sometimes we can be harsh and we can be critical. And oftentimes when we speak, we're not reflecting upon how we're sounding. And so we need to be firm. There's nothing wrong with being firm. I don't have to yell. Deborah and I have never had the practice of yelling at each other. Now, there have been times where our voices were a little firmer than they were other times. But we don't have to yell at our children. It doesn't have to get so many decibels before they listen. I say it the first time, and just so I make sure they hear it. That's what I mean. I said, son, get over here and get this done. I might tell them that. Make sure they heard it. But I'm not going to have to tell them the third time. And the math's not exactly right there. But the point is, you can firmly say what needs to be without having a harsh, caustic, and critical spirit coming across. We can provoke our children to anger by unreasonable demands. And so we want to think about what we do, try to evaluate those. Unfavorable comparison with others. I can remember a fellow I was in high school with, I actually went in the Army with. And I can remember while we were in high school, he would say, my parents are on me all the time. My sister, or my older sister, she can't do anything wrong. But I mean, they're on me. Well, there's probably some truth to that situation. But part of it, she might have been behaving a little bit better than he was. And so some of it he may have brought on himself. But sometimes we can. And you go back to the Old Testament, you can look and see about Jacob and Esau. You can see some differences in favorable treatment and partial treatment. And that's something that a child doesn't forget easily. If we're unjust or unfair. Now, they may sometimes think that things are unjust or unfair. We may need to talk a little bit. So, you don't like this, but this isn't unjust, or this isn't unfair. And so we may need to spend a little time helping them understand that. And there are reasons possibly for that. Inconsistent treatment. We need to have a level of consistency. Constant criticism. It gets to the place, whether we're talking about parenting, we're talking about a husband or a wife relationship, if I'm constantly critical of everything, and my wife can't do anything right, or my child, my son or my daughter can't do anything right, what happens after a while is that, listen, I can't ever do anything right, so I'm just going to quit trying. I mean, practically that's how it can tend to work out. And so we have to step back and learn from that, okay? I need to make correction, I need to train, but I don't have a critical spirit. Now, I have a rule, this is not mathematically correct either, but it'll get the point across. I call it the 9-10 rule. For every time that I criticize, I correct, I discipline in a really firm way my child, I want to express to them 9 other times. I love you, I really appreciate what you did. You got right after that, you worked hard. I want them to know I believe in them and I love them. So that when I have to say, okay, now son, this can't work, they know that I love them. Because I have laid that whole foundation. That's the spirit that I have. And ultimately, that this correction is intended out of love and for their good. Our youngest son, he was probably something like 17 years old. He's about 6'4", 6'5". He's stronger than a horse. I quit wrestling long before that. He was about 12 or 13 one day. I was going to get something out of the high place in the garage. I was going to get a ladder out. So I'll get it, Dad. And he jumped up and just grabbed it, and he just disappeared. He pulled himself up over there. I walked in the house and said, Mama, I ain't wrestling him no more. But he was seeing a girl he had connected, and I'm going to talk about that. And long story short, I've come to find out some things that knew that this was not a good situation. And so I just told my son, said, son, I mean, it would break my heart to see your heart broken. All I can see is in this situation is the outcome will not be good. And I'm concerned about that. And so I just talked with him. And I didn't know for a while, but he called a couple days later and broke it off with this girl. Didn't see her anymore. I didn't even know. Didn't make a big deal out of it. But sometime later, a couple, 3, 4, 5 years later, I forget, he was dating the lady who is now his wife, and they have 5 children. But asked about that, and he told me, he said, Dad, I did not see it at the time. But he said, you always worked for my best interest. You tried to do what was good for me. And so although I couldn't see it, I figured you could see something I couldn't. He says, now I can see it. But then I couldn't. But it's because of the relationship that we're trying to build. And there was another fellow who preached a lot, and he was trying to have an influence on our son when he was out. He says, I know at your age you think your dad doesn't know anything, and he's just a nut, don't you? He said, no, I don't think that at all. Shocked this guy, he told me. But again, that's not intended to be a reflection on me, but what I was trying to say is back to this 9-10 rule. I want my son and my daughter to know that I love them. I care about them. But I have time for them. And so when these things come along, and I'm trying to help them, even if I have to be firm and stern, they know they are loved. And even if they don't agree with it, that I'm trying to work, not for my good, but for their good. But constant criticism will not help that. It will destroy them. Dealing unjustly with various matters is a source, often of anger. There's someone who wrote a book years ago about anger, and basically at the bottom line, underlying most anger is a feeling of injustice. Now sometimes we may not be treated unjustly, but our perception is that we were treated unjustly, and so we become angry. That being the case, as it is, as we think about dealing with our children, we want to try to at least have them understand we're trying to be fair, we're trying to be just. But if we are not, that's something that can promote this anger on their part. And can discourage them, as the Colossian letter talks about. Excessive or unfair punishment. Again, treat others the way you want them to treat you, as we've already introduced. And I talked about this last night, so the parents learn to touch appropriately, Genesis 26 and verse 8. Children find a sense of security in your security. And I want to reemphasize that. The warmth you have as a husband and wife, appropriate relationship there, helps give them a nest or security, a refuge to help them feel secure. And so I just reiterate that for that purpose. And we've introduced Deuteronomy chapter 6, the first 9 in our studies. And in this particular chapter, it deals in a powerful way with our service to God. And again, as time's getting away here, let me just read from our chart. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. These words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and shall talk of them when they sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontals on your forehead. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. We love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, strength, and mind. In 1992, I was in India, my first trip to India, and there was a guy who's not being what he should be. He was hypocritical, long story short. And we came into his house, and they had some beams across there. He had taken chalk, and he'd written this passage. He'd written passages across here. And he was trying to impress the Americans that he was a godly guy. But frankly, it was nauseating. It wanted to make me puke. Writing those things on our refrigerator or our doorpost and not living it is hypocritical. This is saying we are to love God with all our heart. Again, we're imperfect. That's never been excluded. Since the Garden of Eden, that's never been excluded. But the genuineness of our heart. Be genuine. Be real. Be honest. That doesn't mean you got to tell them everything you think or everything you know, but you're trying to serve God. And as this speaks of this relationship with all of your heart, again, that's not simply a New Testament concept. Some people talk like, it never existed before. This isn't Deuteronomy 6. What's the greatest commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. Does this look a little familiar? Again, we're to lead the way. They're looking at a role model. A compass is very one-directional. If it is off just a little bit, what happens is as you travel on, if it's just off a couple degrees, you're going to end up somewhere you didn't want to end up. But a compass, it has a single mind, if you would. And that needs to be our spirit. Humbly loving God, trying to know as a parent the will of Father, and trying to live it. As we looked at Deuteronomy 6 and read just a moment ago, we need to teach them along the way. In the morning, as we live life, oftentimes they may be agricultural, or they might be out shepherding, and Dad would take the boy out with him, and he'd be watching his dad and learning these things. Or to be a carpenter, as we think about Jesus, he would have been rubbing elbows with his father. And there have been applications, and mother, she's making bread or whatever's going on there. And so those are opportunities, morning, noon, and night. Now, as you look at that, again, that's not artificial. It's that this is life. This is how I live my life, son. Here's what we do, Old Farmer Jones next door, he doesn't always do what he's supposed to be, but we're going to try and respect him. And so a son or a daughter learns as we try to live God's Word out in our life. Love God first, His Word in our heart. Good parenting has as much to do with what we really are as a parent. Whenever we obviously place our values, wherever we place them, our children tend to do the same. Again, free will enters into this, no question. There's an article by Sewell Hall, and you are welcome to have a copy of it here. I don't remember, let's see, I think 20 years ago, 20 years ago, it says, are we secularizing our children? And he was talking to a fellow that ran a major university who was a Christian. And he says, it's not the biology department and the anthropology and the English department, all those that's killing our kids. Is that our kids are so engaged with secular things that they don't feed the spiritual things and they die out. We are so concerned about our children being successful in this world that we pursue all those things and our eyes aren't up where they're supposed to be. That's what they can see. Now, we need to be good employees, we need to be good neighbors, and those things. We live life. But you're welcome to this, and if I hadn't done so long early on, I might have read this now. But you're welcome to copy this. But it's an excellent article. Matter of fact, in Casey, I turned it into a trifold and put it up in our track rack. I wanted Brethren to see it. Because we make some choices. Sometimes they may not play football all their years, or basketball or soccer, whatever it might be, or play some instrument or this or that. This article says, Sewell said, when I was well, we didn't do those things, but I tell you what, when there's a gospel meeting, we were there every night. So we're at a time where we can't hardly plan gospel meetings because everybody's got so many secular things going, their life can't be interrupted. And in this, he's appropriately balanced. He said, we didn't follow all the things that my parents did in that, and his kids did band and some other things. So it's not saying we can't do those, but we can crowd our life with so many secular pursuits that we think our kids just have to have, that we allow that to crowd out that which is really important. Go back to Deuteronomy chapter 6. That's at the heart of it. And we need to train our children. The book of Proverbs just talks about the instruction. If you listen to wisdom, and in chapter 1, verse 3, it gives us exhortations. Starting in verse 8, listen to the instruction of your father and your mother, and it goes on through there. And in Proverbs chapter 5, in verse 21 through 23, we see a little bit of the other side of that coin. Proverbs chapter 5, verse 21 through 23. For the way of a man is before the eyes of the Lord, and he who watches all his paths. For his own iniquities will capture the wicked, and he will be held with the cords of his sin, and he will die for a lack of instruction. and in the greatness of his following, he will go astray. A lack of instruction. We need to train and instruct our children. There is a time and a special opportunity in Proverbs 19:18. Discipline your son while there is hope, and do not desire his death. In a previous chart, those early years are important. I think that's a reflection of this particular proverb. That there are special times that we have an opportunity to start forming and molding their thinking, their personality, and who they are. We're trying to mold them to be more Christ-like. But again, hopefully they see that in us. But it's important that we start young. It has been said, what youth learns, age does not forget. Learning in childhood is like engraving on a stone, an Arabian proverb. See, I mean, people just by human experience understand this. This is an Arabian proverb. Learning in childhood is like engraving on a stone. It sticks with you. Purpose in life. What are we doing? I like clipper ships. I mean, I wouldn't like to have been on one of them. They were horrible. But I love the wind. I love my motorcycle. I love the wind. I can just imagine myself. Deborah and the kids bought me a watercolor painting. It's just a reprint. It's stuck in my office for a Father's Day gift one year. And it's this clipper ship. The sails are full. And there are times in my office when I was feeling frustrated. I could mentally just stand on the front of that clipper ship, feel that breeze. Let go of some of that tension. But I enjoy that. But I was looking at a book back several years ago and I ran across this picture. And this picture was showing how they prepared and grew the parts to build one of these ships. They would take a small sapling, which you can see like here, and they would tie ropes to it. They would put pressure here, they tie together there. And so they would make curves. They would continue to put pressure over a period of time. They would train it. So the result is the part that they needed for the leadership. That's really the idea that we see as we look at Ephesians chapter 6. This idea of a training. Or if you have a small tree out there, you're going to do those things to train it up. So kids can't run over. You may build a fence around it. But you may tie it out so the wind doesn't lay it over or some such thing happening. But as we look at our children, as we're trying to influence, as we're trying to help their thinking go in a good way, again, we have to ask ourselves, what is my real purpose? And what is seen? If I find my secular activities and my hobbies or my work in the way all the time of spiritual things, it's really easy for my child to say, well, those spiritual things aren't really the most important. I moved out to the state of Washington many years ago to try to help start a work. Stayed there for a little bit, and I moved to Seattle. We had a daughter, and Deborah was pregnant, expecting twins, which we didn't know about quite yet, and I went to work for a company there. And in the midst of all of that, one of the things that you learn is that there are just lots of things that are going to influence your life. They're going to impact you. And just to be honest with you, I forgot my thought. But this training process is critical. I'll remember tomorrow. But what is our real purpose? That's where our chart is here. All right, the laugh's on me. I'm laughing at myself. In the book of Hebrews, the 12th chapter, verses 5 through 11, it talks about this matter of training. In Hebrews chapter 12, verses 5 through 11, what it especially deals with, as we look at this, is our spiritual training. And in Hebrews 5, he compares it to fathers training their children physically. And he says in verse 5, have you forgotten the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons? Now, you won't be able to see this in my Bible, but here's discipline, 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 all down through. I've got it highlighted in red. This is about discipline, which is basically training that we're talking about. Our Heavenly Father trains us spiritually as His children. The text tells us as we get down to verse 11 All discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful but sorrowful, yet to those who have been trained by it, afterwards it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. There has to be the willingness. Our Heavenly Father is trying to train you and train me as His children. But we have to be willing to learn. And the opportunities that He makes, just like these gospel meetings that you have, or maybe Sunday at worship, or Bible study, or things that happen in life, God is trying to train us. If we will learn from it afterwards, it will have a yield. We're talking about gardening a minute ago. Love watching all that grow, but I sure do like that first ripe tomato. Well, that big old watermelon is cold and juicy. Afterward, it yields a sweet fruit. That's the purpose, ultimately, of training. It's not a busy activity just to have something to do. It has purpose. Again, we ask ourselves the questions. We think about our children, just like we asked last night about our marriage. Where do we want our marriage to be down the road? What's the real purpose as we train our children? Is it so that they will live for God and go to heaven? Back years ago, our daughter and son-in-law were dating, and we were driving from Illinois in December down to Tennessee to see family. I mean, it was snowing, cold, and blowing, and out in the middle of nowhere, our son-in-law asked for our daughter's hand. I'd like to marry your daughter. Can I have your permission? And I started laughing. I said, you picked a pretty interesting place to ask this question. It's cold out there. And of course, we were glad to give it. I was telling a man by the name of Charlie King. He used to be a member at Roanoke, where my son-in-law preaches. And we were talking about that, and he said, you know, that's interesting. Because our daughter was dating a fellow who was in Alabama, and he called to ask for our daughter's hand. And Charlie said, I have one question for you, son. Her mother and I have spent our lives with one purpose and one goal in mind, trying to raise her so she will go to heaven. If I give you permission to marry my daughter, will you pick that up and will you help her the rest of her life get to heaven? And he says, I will, sir. And this was a number of years then, Charlie was telling me after that event. And he says, to this point in time, he's doing it. What is the purpose of the training of my children? Is it so they'll be famous, they'll have a lot of money, they'll have some prestige, they'll have some earthly goal? I want them to have things that I did not have. Well, they may have some of those things, but our purpose needs to be to become more like our Lord, to live for Him, to have heaven, have eternity as our home. This physical and spiritual training have a purpose. We need to understand that discipline is not something that we do to our children, but rather something we do for our children, for our child. Sometimes we think about discipline, something we do to them. We're doing this for them. That's what Hebrews 12 talks about. I'm trying to help this boy or this girl to understand and to learn, not to keep doing those mistakes, to have some self-control, some things of this nature. I've told my children, my grandchildren, they were growing up, I love you too much to let you behave like that, son. Yeah, Deborah helped me learn this many years ago between our own children and the daycare. She says one of the most important things that you teach this small child is self-control. That is not politically correct. But it is one of the most critical things you will do for your small children. And as they're growing up, you help them learn to have self-control. My favorite passage, or one of my favorite passages, is Proverbs chapter 25 and in verse 28. And the picture the proverb writer says, like a city, this fortified city, whose walls have been knocked down, is like a man who has no self-control. The city's walls are put up there to protect what's within. You knock those walls down, and any enemy can come along and get inside and do whatever he wants to do. He says that's the way self-control is. If you don't have self-control, anything can come along and be your master. You give in to it. I need to teach my child that. I've got a good friend I traveled overseas with a couple of times. And when he was a young man and his boys were little, he said, I would toss a quarter out in the middle of the floor and say, son, don't you touch that. That had one purpose, so that they would learn self-control. He said, when I tell you to stop, you don't take one more step. You stop right there. He said, it may save your life one of these days. I tell you to stop instead of run out in front of that car. You stop right now. He's trying to teach them self-control. This is a critical thing. Now, let me ask you another question. Is it going to be more difficult for me to teach my child self-control if I don't practice any self-control myself? There's times we might let something slide. There's other times we might speak up and say, well, I sort of want to do this, but this was better, son, so I chose to do that. That we practice. This, again, is not politically correct, but teaching a strong work ethic. I was in Sierra Leone in 2012 with a fellow named Larry Payton. He retired at age 51 from a national news media that ran lots of newspapers across the country. And he took that money and he put it into a trust fund so he could do evangelism in different places. But he was talking to me, he says, teach your boys work ethic. My boys were already grown and they had a work ethic. He said, I travel around all the time. And this idea of having a work ethic is something that is just so inclusive. And our youngest son that I was telling you about that's tall, his degree's in construction management. I talked to him and said, finding guys that have a real work ethic is hard. Our society has said, we want to give you everything, and then the next generation says, we deserve everything. Again, that has not been by accident. The devil has worked hard. Teaching them confidence, having a good work ethic, helps them with having this level of confidence. This word narcissism is not a word that I knew 15 or 20 years ago. It's not a term I used. But it just means being self-absorbed. And it comes from antiquity, that this guy supposedly was so admiring himself that he just looked in this pool of water. And he just so admired himself, he turns into a flower or something. And that's where that word came from. But we're just so self-absorbed. There was a great movement to talk about having this good self-image. And that trend, and I'm all for that. But let me tell you, the top of this chart, you want to give your child a self-image that's good. Certainly you teach them a work ethic. But you teach them how to serve. They'll find, as is said in Acts the 20th chapter, it's better to give than to receive. It's not all about me. But if I can learn to serve, it'll be a great blessing. It'll help them with their self-image. And it's not because I got a beautiful face or an ugly face, or because I'm huge or I'm too skinny, or my ears are too big or my ears are too small, or one eye is blue and one eye is green. Those aren't the things that make a person beautiful. Ultimately, it's what's inside. Yeah, they're physical beauty. The Bible talks certainly about that. But that's not what really matters. We've got to get away from this. It's all about me. And we need to be consistent. As we discipline, as we train, we need to follow through. Sometimes mothers or fathers will say, now son, your daughter, do this. Then they'll follow through. They don't really think about it. They don't pay any attention. We need to follow through. Now, I realize sometimes we'll drop the ball on that. But the reality is, when we give instruction, we need to have enough mental awareness about it that we watch and make sure that that's carried through. Sometimes we need to choose those fights, so to say, those situations, but help them learn that what they choose to do, and whether they listen or obey, it has consequences. I read a thing a couple of weeks ago, I think it was a fourth grader who wrote it, said, if you could choose something that had never been invented, what would it be? And so kids turn in this paper. And I think it was a fourth grader, turned in the paper, so I wish the cell phone had never been invented. So my parents would know that I'm around. And sometimes a mother or father will say, now, son, you do this, but they're over here, they're not following through. They're not paying any attention. I've got to know what's on Google, I've got to know what's on Facebook, I've got to be absorbed in that stuff. If that stuff's going to get in the way, throw it out the window. Or give it to me and I'll throw it in the pond. I love my technology. I've got a phone, I've got an iPad, I've got a computer. But if they get in the way of with my marriage relationship, as we talked about last night, or with my children. There are some folks I have a hard time getting hold of in the congregation, and it doesn't bother me at all. Not when the reason is because I'm focused on trying to do my response, to take care of my husband and my kids. I'll look at my messages later. I'll respond to that call later. Now, I realize that has challenges. Sometimes you need to hold right in. But a couple of these situations I'm thinking of, they're busy doing what they ought to be doing. And they say, I'm not going to let this cell phone control my life. Facebook is not my Lord. And my children are certainly more important than all of them. And so we need to understand that. There was a fellow who was preaching down in Memphis, Tennessee. He was telling about he and his family went to a restaurant to eat. They sat down there and they saw this next table, they didn't have a prayer here. The husband, wife, and some kids, they all had their heads bowed. So, well, it's nice to see somebody else praying. And then they went ahead and put their order, and the folks were still all bowed down over there. And said, oh, they're really, must be some godly folks. So he got up to go to the bathroom, so they all had their cell phones down, and they were on the table like this. They didn't even know anyone existed at that table, hardly. That's a crying shame, isn't it? So be mindful of that. And we've got to be mindful of what comes into our home. I talked about pornography a little bit last night. We need to protect our children because predators are everywhere. You need to put watchdog software on devices to help protect them. Don't put a computer and those devices in their home where they've got privacy. What I look at on the internet, anybody can see. There's nothing shameful about them. We need to protect them. We need to help them. We need to turn the TV off or throw it out the window. If it's going to interfere, there's not much good that comes out of television. I'll just tell you that. We raised our children and we did not have a television hooked up. When I would go to India, we'd hook the cable up so Deborah could make sure India didn't fall off in the ocean while I was over there. And she would record some old westerns or things like that on VHS tapes. A few of you know what those are. And then Saturday night, we'd have popcorn and watch an old western movie or something like that. So we had a TV, but our TV did not control us. One of the interesting things, I never talked about that a whole lot, but our children are hooked up to cable. I don't think any of them are. They watch a little bit of TV here, there, and yonder. It's not something we preached, we strongly promoted, but they saw the value of it. They are not 1 ounce worse off. Matter of fact, they are way better off because we chose to do that. Now it's much worse with the internet, computers, iPhones, and all this kind of thing. We're almost done. We're out of time. I took a piece of plastic clay and idly fashioned it one day. And as my fingers pressed it still, it moved and yielded to my will. I came again when days were past. The bit of clay was hard at last. The form I gave it, it still bore. But I could change that form no more. I took a piece of living clay and gently formed it day by day, and molded with my power and art a young child's soft and yielding heart. I came again when years were gone, was a man that I looked upon. He still that early impressed wore, and I could change him. We're going to stop at that point. But remember, there's a purpose. Not only our children, but many of you have grandchildren. You have to be careful sometimes with your own children. You've only got so many punch card holes to punch in your influence there, but do everything you can to encourage them and encourage those grandkids in the way that's right before you. Thank you for listening.